Study number 2. This is a very easy piece by Fernando Sor that is part of his Opus 60, number 2. Opus 60 was a set of pieces he wrote that were really designed to be very easy pieces on a few different levels. Some of them are in slightly exotic keys, but we'll cross that bridge as we do more of these. But number 2 is a very simple single line melody, kind of, in the key of C, and in 3/4 time, really just mixing up quarter notes and eighth notes. So the rhythm is very straightforward, the melody notes are all very easy to reach, everything happens in first position, you don't ever have to leave here, and the lowest note we see is a C in the bass, very few notes on the bass strings, so if you play your C scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, and continuing D, E, F, G, and an occasional F sharp, and a C sharp that's going to happen in there at one point, a couple of accidentals, you'll have all the notes ready. Now as far as the left hand goes, you're pretty much going to play in first position with your first finger covering the first fret, second finger at the second fret, third and fourth at the third fret. Generally your third finger would play the lower strings at the third fret, and your fourth finger would play the higher strings on the third fret. So when you need a D or a G, you're probably going to use your ring finger, but when you need a C or an F in the bass, you're going to usually use your third finger. So left hand is pretty straightforward. In the next segment, I'm going to play this for you. I'm just going to give you a couple of things I want you to try to do first before you hear it. And so the next stage is going to be for you to work on sight reading through it and see if you can get a feel for the melody and play it enough times to where you've got it clear in your head. Now some other decisions we're going to talk about later are right hand fingerings. Whether you want to play this with a pick, which would be fine, whether you want to play it with one finger, I might run through this at one point with just my thumb, and I'll explain why later on, or multiple fingers. Now Sor typically only played with thumb, index, and middle fingers, where the middle finger only played the first string, and the thumb and middle and index finger played some of the rest of the notes, thumb playing a lot of the notes in the bass, most of the notes, and especially if you have eighth notes, even on a higher string, it would be the thumb for the first and index for the second. So we don't necessarily need to do that unless we want to go hardcore into studying the way Sor taught guitar back in the late 18th century, early 19th century. But you could also play it with standard classical guitar position using all three fingers and alternating technique. So I'll talk about some of the different possibilities. But the big thing I want you to think about, and further down the line, is what notes should ring and what notes should get cut off, and when should they get cut off. This is a decision you always have to make on the guitar that you don't if you're playing the flute. You can't let a note ring past the next note. So the notes can be very close together, but they can't overlap. On a guitar or a piano or a harp, you have different dynamic or different criteria, I guess, that you have to take into account. And so with this particular piece, we have to weigh in: do we want notes to ring or do we want them not to ring? And if we want them to stop ringing and they're an open note, we have to figure out a way to stop it. So we will talk about muting a little bit as well. And because, for example, if we were playing this on the harp, we would have the option of stopping notes or letting them ring. I might even talk about what it would sound like if we were playing it on tubular bells, where every bell rings because you've got hammers in your hand and they just have to ring over each other. So we'll see. The flute versus tubular bells discussion may happen a little bit later, depending on how the rest of this lesson goes. So in any case, coming up in the next segment, I'll play through it approximately the way I would expect to hear it, but every time I play this, I sometimes think, you know what, I want that note to ring, this time I don't want that note to ring. So we change those, I kind of change those gears just with every little run through of it, and sometimes the wind shifts and I think, you know what, I want to cut those notes off. So we'll explore that later, but start working on just playing through it from beginning to end and getting the notes right. That's the first step on this. It's just a sight reading drill. So coming up, I will play it so you can hear what it sounds like, and after that we'll talk about some of the right hand possibilities. Study number 2. Let's compare now a couple of different sounds. Now I'm going to try to play through it more like we would hear from a flute or a violin or a single line instrument without letting notes ring over each other. Now the way I'm going to do that is by playing probably not playing any open notes and playing as many notes as possible on the same string so that they all, and maybe even everything with my thumb. We'll see how this goes. But the goal here is going to be to let you hear what it sounds like if the notes don't ring over each other. The ending, since we've got double notes, gets a little out of hand. But again, you can hear that kind of sound. Just the first couple of lines, we hear only one note. As opposed to now I'm going to play it with a pick and let all the notes ring as long as possible. So this will be our bell choir, our tubular bells sound, or if just letting every note ring, harp sound, as long as possible. We'll see. See if I can get through it like this. Quite different, I hope, don't you think? And some of that sounded really good, and some of it sounded a little fuller. It certainly sounded a lot fuller, but some of it sounded a little, there were some clashes in there that were created by that. So in the next segment I will kind of break it down measure by measure and talk about what I think maybe should happen in the measure. It is somewhere in between those two. Again, we've got the single line version, the way you might sing it, and the harp-like version where every note rings. And neither of those is exactly appropriate for this, but different people that play it would have different opinions about it too. So generally the idea of letting a note ring is if it's part of the prevailing harmony, or well, then you want to let it ring. And if a note clashes, if it doesn't sound good, you stop it. Now some notes you have to stop because it maybe is going from an open B to a C. If we decide we want that B to ring over the C, we have to play them on different strings. That's getting a little bit more involved than we need to for this sight reading exercise, but I just want to take this to a slightly, add a couple of extra angles to this. So I want you to mess around with that a little bit and see what you think should happen as far as what should ring and what shouldn't. And I will come up with my opinion in the next segment.